Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another hour of Healthy Conclusions, where we try to give our listeners important information on nutrition, exercise, and holistic alternative or integrative medicine. My name is Bob Neugebauer, and I will be your host for this evening's show. Tonight's show is being brought to you by Altrua Health Share, which has been serving its members and their families since 1997 with their health care needs. Take a moment to visit their website at altruahealthshare.org. They could make a difference providing an alternative to your current health care program. I'd like to introduce my guest for this evening. His name is Dr. Gary Shohet. He's from Boise, and he has a naturopathic center there. Dr. Shohet has been a licensed doctor of chiropractic since 1982. He received a Doctor of Naturopathic Medicine in 2008 and was certified in acupuncture in 2000. As a functional medicine physician since 2082, Dr. Shohet is dedicated to finding and treating the cause of conditions, not simply covering the symptoms. Dr. Shohet, could you tell us a little about your practice focus and if you have any specialties?
Absolutely. My practice focus is functional medicine. My initial training is as a doctor of chiropractic. I no longer practice chiropractic at all. My practice is 100% functional medicine.
Could you explain what functional medicine is to our audience?
Absolutely. Functional medicine really starts out with reading a functional blood chemistry, which is a blood chemistry that is pretty much traditional as far as how it's performed, but it is read completely differently. And instead of reading each of the different indices as a standalone, we look for specific patterns of function that give us an idea of how the body's functioning, if it's functioning optimally or if it's barely functioning at all. From a traditional perspective, when you look at a blood chemistry, we're trying to rule out either pathology or disease, which is wonderful. But we can go well beyond that by looking for how the body is performing well before it becomes pathology or disease.
So you're trying to find a roadmap to the disease, is that correct?
Absolutely.
Okay, which is a little different than what conventional medicine is doing.
Absolutely. And then we also utilize the blood chemistry as a follow-up, as our report card. It gives us an idea of what our starting point is. It tells us our direction. It gives us an idea of the type of protocols that we need to follow. And then down the line, when we redo a blood chemistry, it tells us basically how we did. Did we do what we think we were going to do? Are we on track? Are we completely off base? Do we need to change protocols? And what's nice about the using a functional blood chemistry is that it really doesn't matter what the theory or the philosophy is walking into it. What matters is that the blood chemistry is 100% objective. And so it tells us exactly how we did and what we need to change.
So you're basically a science-driven naturopathic medicine.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely. I like to say that we make our decisions based on science, not folklore. And naturopathic medicine in the past really has been driven by folklore, what's been passed down for generations. And not that it doesn't work, it does. But this allows us to be even more specific. It allows us to be more exact, and it allows us to follow and track our progress. You know, my motto is data, data, data. The more data we have, the better direction and the better protocols we can make.
So when a patient would come into you, I would imagine they would have a multitude of forms to fill out about their history. Is that correct?
Absolutely. We do what's called a multiple system assessment, and it's a questionnaire that has well over 100 questions that asks basic questions about how tired are you, how fatigued are you. It talks about exciting things like bowel movements and how you deal with stress. And what it allows us to do is we put that information, which is 100% subjective, we put that together with the blood chemistry, which is 100% objective, and it starts to tell a story, and it gives us direction. And then as we redo those tests as we go along, as the patient improves, it allows us to even further fine-tune our treatment protocols.
What in particular do you look for in the blood chemistry in your particular focus of your medicine?
Our blood chemistry, our basic foundational blood chemistry is extremely comprehensive. We start out every patient with a complete metabolic, a lipid, a CBC with differential, a vitamin D. We look for inflammatory markers like CRP, HSCRP. We do a full and complete thyroid. There's about 7 portions to the thyroid. We include thyroid antibodies, free T3, free T4, T uptake, reverse T3. We do what's also called ANA, which is looking for other types of autoimmune disease. We do a test called A1C, which tests how the body is handling blood sugars. We test for fibrinogen to see if the person is susceptible to blood clots, homocysteine, which is a cardiovascular marker. And then we also do a urinalysis on top of that. And what this allows us to do is to look for patterns that give us an overall idea of how the body is working together. We commonly make a mistake in saying, well, the adrenal stands by itself. The thyroid stands by itself. The pancreas stands by itself. And nothing could be further from the truth. The reality is, especially when it comes to thyroid, there are receptor sites at every single organ in the body that are related to the thyroid. So unless you get a full and complete picture of how the body is functioning, you really cannot get a comprehensive protocol that is as optimal as can be.
So the thyroid is basically a big controlling organ in the body. Is that correct?
It's massive. And unfortunately, we've missed the boat on treating it efficiently and effectively. There is a symbiotic relationship between the endocrine, which are your hormones, hepatic, which is detoxification, your immune system, your nervous system, and literally every other body system. Without the thyroid functioning optimally, there's no way that you can be a healthy person.
So it's probably one of the key elements in detecting what somebody is susceptible to or what their problem is. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's foundational enough that it needs to be crossed off as far as one of the early things that you make sure is functioning optimally. The thyroid is essentially, it's the spark plug of energy production. It regulates the rate of energy production. In children, it regulates growth. It has a huge impact on brain chemistry. It influences mood. It influences emotion. It's a multi-system crosstalk between thyroid, immune, nervous, endocrine. And again, literally every single cell in the human body has a receptor site. So the impact of a deficient thyroid is massive.
Now, I go to the doctor every year for a checkup. I have never had them ask me or check my thyroid. Are they kind of different than what you do?
Well, it's not unusual for traditional docs to take a look at the thyroid, but they look at it in a very limited way. There's one particular marker called TSH. It stands for thyroid stimulating hormone. It's a hormone that's produced by the pituitary, and it basically tells the thyroid what to do. And in traditional medicine, if TSH is within its normal reference range of what they consider a normal reference range, you're essentially given the thumbs up. You're told that your thyroid is fine, everything is normal, and any issues or concerns you have could not possibly be related to the thyroid. And in our world, that's just a fraction of the picture. TSH, there's actually 6 different major patterns of non-immune thyroid, and TSH is just one of them. High TSH, which is what is looked at in traditional perspective, TSH increases when T4, which is thyroid hormone, decreases. And this is, in fact, true hypothyroidism. So the fact that when they're measuring high TSH, it does measure hypothyroidism, but it misses a lot of the secondary parts. For example, you can have hypothyroidism secondary to a pituitary hypofunction. Think about it. If TSH is actually produced by the pituitary, and we're using TSH as the sole marker of what the thyroid is doing, if the pituitary is not functioning appropriately, it can't possibly send the message to the thyroid. So the thyroid is just doomed to fail.
So again, this is part of your roadmap to find out what is actually going on with a person.
This is a test that we will do on every single patient that we are even slightly suspicious that the thyroid is a player. Which in our practice, every single patient that walks in the door gets a full thyroid evaluation.
I have heard and seen some surveys that hyperthyroid disease is an epidemic in this country, and there have been estimates of between 10 to 40% of the people have subclinical problems right now?
Yeah, and that number is traveling north. The latest numbers that I've seen are significantly higher than that. And so it seems like the epidemic is growing. It's getting worse. And we're just not stepping up and doing a great job with it. There are all kinds of alternatives. There are all kinds of treatments that we can do. But the first thing first, you need to recognize, number one, if you even have a thyroid condition. And maybe we should talk about that. Maybe we should talk about what some of the symptoms are. You know, patients come in all the time that are complaining of unexplained weight gain. They have low energy. They got cold hands, cold feet. They got hair loss. They've lost a portion of their eyebrows. They're constipated. They're fatigued. Depression is huge. They have heart palpitations. They have low libido. They can't sleep at night. They're anxious. They have brain fog. We see this on a regular basis.
That's an awful lot of symptoms.
Exactly. And again, in our practice, that covers a whole lot of ground. And unless you do a full and complete and comprehensive thyroid evaluation and make sure that the thyroid is functioning appropriately, you're not going to have a healthy patient.
Okay, we're going to have to take a break here, Doctor. We'll be back in a few minutes. Thank you all for listening. This is 580 KIDO. Welcome back to Health Conclusions. On 580 KIDO, we're speaking with Dr. Gary Shohet about thyroid disease, sponsored by Altrua HealthShare. Doctor, you continue on what we were talking about, and we were talking about symptoms and
there's a number of symptoms that really many patients have. You know, the weight gain, the low energy again, the anxiety is huge, the depression is huge. And we have a tendency sometimes when we look at depression, we look at brain, we look at nervous system, we don't think about thyroid. When we think about insomnia, we don't necessarily look at the thyroid, we look for other causes. And from my perspective, we've got to address these first before we can start looking in other directions.
This sounds like an autoimmune disease. Is the thyroid considered an autoimmune disease?
Well, there are parts of it that are autoimmune, but before you even consider the autoimmune part, we got to look at what is the thyroid actually doing. For example, again, if you have high TSH on your blood test, it tells you that you're not producing enough thyroid hormone. If this all by itself just means that the thyroid isn't producing, this is true hypothyroidism. Again, if your pituitary isn't sending the signal to the thyroid to produce thyroid hormone, then the problem is not thyroid, it's pituitary, and that needs to be addressed differently. Commonly, we'll see that in an active stress response. Now, there's different parts of thyroid hormone. Parts of it are called free T4, and if free T4 does not convert to free T3, which is the active part of the hormone, then you're going to have a hypothyroid. You won't see that if you're only looking at TSH. Then you can have overconversion. Commonly, you have overconversion when you have excess hormone actually overwhelms their cell receptor sites. And if you look at that, if you happen to look at a test that shows free T3, it'll look like there's more hormone than the cell knows what to do with. And so if you look at it just as a single pattern, you would think, well, gosh darn it, the patient should be running around with more energy than they know what to do with. But the reality is that the cell has to desensitize because it's been overwhelmed. And in order to operate appropriately, it actually desensitizes and becomes more resistant. So it takes more to accomplish less. The end result is hypothyroidism.
Now, can you put this into about one sentence that our audience can kind of think about? I know the T3s and the T4s, I'm versed in them. Many of them are not. But is this just basically a malfunction of the different hormones within the thyroid?
Exactly. You have bound hormone, which is used, and spent hormone, which really it's a combination of hormone that has already been used with hormone that may be available. And how much becomes available is determined by another hormone called thyroid binding globulin. And at the end result, it really is a matter of how much free and available T4 you have and how much free and available T3 you have. But those numbers, unless you look at them as a pattern, can be extraordinarily deceptive.
And the availability of these is basically dependent on the pituitary gland. Is that correct?
Well, the pituitary initiates the stimulation to the thyroid, but there's other components that can control how much of that hormone is actually received into the receptor site.
Sounds like a very busy mechanism.
It's very busy, and when traditional medicine attempts to simplify it by only looking at TSH, it is very easy to understand why so many thyroid patients are not getting the relief that they need.
So there's a lot of misdiagnosis here.
There's probably 90% misdiagnosis.
Wow. So you could go and see a conventional doctor, have him do this test, and he would never know that you have a serious thyroid condition. Is that correct?
Unless you see somebody that is trained in functional endocrinology, that understands the interrelationship between the pituitary and the thyroid, and understands the relationship between stress, excess hormones, underconversion, overconversion, thyroid resistance, unless you understand that, it's near impossible to have a healthy thyroid.
Well, is that the reason why we have 10 to 40% of the people in this country with thyroid problems? Because they are misdiagnosed and nobody's catching this?
I think that it probably is. I think that we can do a whole lot better job than what we've done in evaluating and treating. Now, if you don't evaluate better, it's easy to see why you can't treat better. So there's a number of reasons why these patterns are disrupted. Blood sugars are huge. Blood sugar balances are considered a deal breaker in balancing thyroid hormones. So you have some patients that are hypoglycemic, meaning their blood sugars are extremely low, and you have other patients that are hyperglycemic that have insulin resistance. Now, when the blood sugars are bouncing around, again, that's a huge player for the thyroid. Insulin greatly affects thyroid receptors in thyroid hormone. Hormone imbalances are huge. Again, it's very difficult many times for women to get their hormones balanced as they get older. And females that are on exogenous hormones, hormone supplementation, that's even a greater issue. Adrenal dysfunction is a player. People that are stressed out, the adrenal glands help you deal with stress. They help you deal with life. Healthy adrenal glands help you differentiate between little things in life and the big things in life. And when your adrenals are really healthy, you're able to put things in perspective. When the adrenals are fatigued, it takes very, very little to throw you off your game. The wind blows the wrong direction, and it becomes a problem.
So these hormones are basically involved in balancing your life. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Again, the entire endocrine system, and I think between the adrenals and the thyroid, they are the fulcrum of the endocrine system. The adrenals and the thyroid are largely married to each other. The adrenals can affect the thyroid can affect the adrenals. And between the two of them, they control all of the downstream hormones. So stress, anxiety, depression, all of that needs to be addressed. It's not simply a matter of take this magic pill, whether it's synthetic or natural. It's not a matter of I'm going to take this magic pill and my thyroid's going to be better. It just doesn't work like that. That's not what functional medicine or integrative medicine is.
So you're telling me this is a very complicated disease. How do the insurance companies treat this?
Unfortunately, to this point, they're staying clear of it, which isn't doing anybody any favors because, you know, our costs are very reasonable, but it's comprehensive. It takes a matter of people really understanding and doing these comprehensive tests so they can get their arms wrapped around what the problem is. Lots of times, the insurance companies will actually dictate what lab tests the physician can perform or not. And so if the insurance company is only going to allow the physician to perform a very limited test, the physician's hands are tied. And there's no way that they're going to be able to get the three-dimensional picture of what's going on with simply a TSH. So I think largely the insurance companies are at fault that thyroid disease and endocrine issues exist the way that they do, and probably why our healthcare system is in the situation that it's in.
Well, evidently it seems to be inadequate in this particular case.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Can you go into something called Hashimoto's disease, which is an autoimmune disease, and I understand that this is a serious problem within many people as an autoimmune disease in this country?
Very rarely tested. Again, the insurance companies don't like to test for them. But antibodies called thyroglobulin and thyroid peroxidase are autoimmune antibodies that are specific to the thyroid. If you have elevated thyroglobulin or TPO, you do have Hashimoto's and you do have an autoimmune disease.
Now, when you say autoimmune, that means your own immune system is attacking your body. Is that correct?
Exactly.
Okay.
And that's a huge issue, especially with thyroid disease, because from a traditional medical perspective, there's zero treatment for it, and there's zero attempt to treat for it. And unless the immune system gets ridiculously out of control, the immune component is completely 100% ignored. If you go to your traditional medical doc, they'll look at the effect that the autoimmune disease has on simply TSH. And the prescription for different medications is simply to make TSH look better on your lab test. But it does zero to address the fact that the immune system is attacking the thyroid.
So what they're doing is they're giving you something for the symptoms, but they're not getting to the root of the problem.
Exactly. And that's what functional medicine does. It focuses and addresses the condition that is causing the symptoms, and we're not simply putting a wet Band-Aid on the symptoms to cover it up and pretend that we did a good job. Now, many times, for a short period of time, once you go on a thyroid hormone, you may feel better for a short period of time. But because the cause of it has never been addressed, and in the case of Hashimoto's, it's the immune attack, it's short-lived.
Excuse me.
And you're constantly chasing that.
Doc, we have to take another quick break here, but we'll be back in a few minutes. You're listening to 580 KIDO. Welcome back to Healthy Conclusions on 580 KIDO. We're speaking with Dr. Gary Shohat about thyroid disease, sponsored by Altrua Healthcare. And, Doctor, we were just talking about Hashimoto's and how conventional doctors get this diagnosis wrong so many times because it is an autoimmune disease.
And that's absolutely true. It's not addressed because, honestly, to my knowledge, there really isn't a reasonable traditional medical prescription that'll address the autoimmune component unless the immune system is completely out of control. And if you have an extreme response, which we'll see in some autoimmune diseases like MS or lupus, the patient may be put on something like Humira, which is an immune suppressant. But with thyroid disease, autoimmune thyroid disease, that almost never happens. And quite frankly, why would you want to suppress the immune system when you have other options to balance it and strengthen it and help it support the condition as opposed to opposing it? Our treatment for autoimmune disease couldn't be more opposite than how the traditional medical folks do. The traditional medical folks would like to basically just suppress it. And if they suppress it, then they reduce the amount of attack onto the tissue, which makes sense at one level. But if you can go further and you can identify some of the triggers and some of the reasons why the immune system is attacking, and you address those triggers, that to me seems like a much smarter way to address it. Now, the problem with that is that it does take a whole lot more patient compliance and patient involvement. It's not simply a matter of, I'm going to take this magic pill and my autoimmune disease is going to go away. The fact of the matter is, once you have an autoimmune disease, it's a keeper. You have it. And none of us have the ability to completely make it go away. We do have the ability to manage it, and we can manage it very appropriately. But again, our method of treatment and our method of management couldn't be more opposite of how the traditional medical folks do.
Well, as somebody who's been around traditional medical folks for quite some time, as I understand it, again, they just treat the symptoms and try to suppress the symptoms rather than getting to the root of the problem. But again, you have to get the patient to understand what his problem or her problem is and to acquiesce and go along with all of the different complicated changes they have to make in their lifestyles
that's exactly right. You know, we have patients that come into the office that don't completely understand how integrative and naturopathic medicine works. And sometimes we're told, well, my doctor just prescribed Synthroid. Could you give me the natural alternative? And they're looking for just the exchange. Or my doctor just prescribed Valium. Or my doctor just prescribed whatever medication. And what they're looking for is they're looking for the natural alternative. And for some very simple cases, that may work. But if you really want to get your arms wrapped around your health, you really need to take a look at, so why are you even here in the first place? What's working, what's not working? What are the triggers? What's being absorbed into your system? Things, again, like blood sugar imbalances are a huge player. Insulin resistance is massive. You have to take a look at gut infections. You know, some people think, well, if I'm not doubled over in pain, my gut must be working right. Well, that's not necessarily true. You could have low-level bugs and parasites. You can have low-level food allergies or food sensitivities. Stress plays a huge role, and I always say stress is physical, chemical, and emotional. You have to deal with all three parts of that. Vitamin D deficiencies are massive. The use of birth control or any type of a hormone imbalance is a massive issue. Inflammation, whether it's caused by bugs, bacteria, virus, food sensitivities, or a chronic injury, inflammation actually causes a block to absorption. Excess iodine. Folklore will tell you that all thyroid conditions are due to inefficient amounts or inadequate amounts of iodine. Well, if you have an autoimmune condition and you add iodine, that's like throwing gas on a fire. That's going to exacerbate it. Toxicity is an issue. Most of your hormones are basically cleared by your liver. All of your hormones are cleared by your liver. Sugar balance has a liver component. So if you don't have hepatic detoxification, which is optimized, that's going to contribute potentially to all of your endocrine or autoimmune issues.
So when you're talking about detoxification, are you talking about heavy metals that settle in your body that have to be removed through chelation?
Well, that's one part of it, but that's not necessarily the major part of it. I want to make sure that when we look again at your profile, that all of your liver enzymes are working optimally, that your liver is capable of clearing hormones. Again, if you can't clear your hormones, you're bound to have a hormone imbalance, and you're bound to have an endocrine issue. There's two primary parts to your immune system. One's called a Th1, the second is a Th2. And Th just basically stands for T helper cells. And to put it very simply, on a daily basis, you ebb and flow from Th1 dominance to Th2 dominance. And they have a very synergistic relationship with each other. If you all of a sudden, because of hormone imbalances or inflammation or toxicity, become Th1 dominant or Th2 dominant, you are set up for an autoimmune disease. So you have actually created the environment that forces you to have an autoimmune disease.
Now, you are the only one, that can determine whether the Th1 or Th2 system is out of balance through your testing. Is that correct?
Well, functional docs can do it.
Okay.
Traditional docs, probably not. We're in the process of having more specific diagnostic tests that we can actually just test blood for. But there's other ways of testing for it that most functional docs would be able to do. But, and again, along with endocrine issues, immune barriers and cell barriers are everything. The old saying, you are what you eat, we've all heard that, you are what you eat. The reality is that that's not necessarily true. The more truer saying is, or the more exact saying should be, you are what you eat, digest, absorb, assimilate, utilize, and eliminate. And a good bit of that has to do with, so what's our ability to digest the good food that we're eating, assuming that we're eating good food? If we're not eating good food, what happens to it? What does our body do to it? Are our cell membranes healthy enough that the good nutrition that we're eating can actually get inside the cell and the toxins get out? That is a huge, huge player.
So again, it comes back to a nutrition problem. One question I have, and I hear this all the time, what part does eating gluten play in this whole thing?
Well, gluten, again, study after study after study, has shown that with all autoimmune disease, gluten is throwing gas on the fire. It will exacerbate in every single case, and that is the most difficult part for many patients, is that if you are diagnosed with any type of autoimmune disease, the number one thing that you need to do is you need to get gluten 100% out of your diet.
Can you explain what gluten is to the audience?
Well, gluten is a component that we'll find essentially in wheat that really has been morphed over the years. And without pointing the finger at any particular companies, in our attempt to amplify our food supply, we have changed the way that wheat and gluten has been produced, and we have actually changed the structure of it. And so what happens now, we eat gluten, it triggers an autoimmune response, and every single time we eat gluten, it's an issue. And it exacerbates the autoimmune response. It literally is like throwing gasoline on the fire, and it initiates the immune system to attack whatever gland is most susceptible. And if it's thyroid disease, it's stimulating the response against the thyroid.
If the farmers and the corporations who produce these crops know that this is a serious problem, and as I understand, 30% of the country could be, or even more, gluten sensitive, why don't they change what they're growing?
Well, that's a question beyond my understanding. I just saw a study this morning showing that Korea's lifespan has increased, and that average lifespan is over 90 years for men, and even just a little bit higher for women. While in the U.S., our lifespan has decreased. It's in the 70s. And if we look at some of the differences, our consumption of wheat and GMOs is continuing to increase, while in Korea, it's almost non-existent.
Can you give me a minute? We're going to have to take another break here, and we'll be back in a few minutes. You're listening to 580 KIDO with Gary Shohet, naturopathic medicine doctor. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Health Conclusions on 580 KIDU. We're speaking with Dr. Gary Shohet about thyroid disease, sponsored by Alchua Healthcare. And we were speaking about gluten and the problems with our food supply, and how Korean people are living longer than us, and by a substantial number, I would think. And it has to do with the nutritional base that we all eat. Is that right?
That's what it's sure looking like. Now, they do other things, like they have significantly greater intake of EPAs, DHAs, which are the good fatty acids. And again, if you think about what are fatty acids for, they are to help build and strengthen the cell membranes that allow the transport of the good nutrition that we're eating to get into the cells and allows the toxins to get out. Cell membrane has a huge, huge play in the health of every single individual cell, along with leaky gut, which we've heard. Leaky gut is when the membranes in the gut, which should act as a filter, start to let go, and instead of the gut holding all of the foodstuffs, you actually get some food byproducts into the bloodstream, which again ultimately will cause an autoimmune response. And leaky gut is very frequently tied to leaky brain. So you can see how this all ties together. And it's really very difficult to just isolate the adrenals by themselves, the thyroid by themselves, the pancreas by themselves. The body, thank goodness, is interrelated, and there's a significant amount of crosstalk.
Well, I think what you're telling us is that the food that we're eating, particularly the processed food, and the changes that they have made in what we grow and how we consume it, are really the causes of all of the problems that we're having today.
To a large degree, that's true. To a large degree, it would be wonderful for us to get back to basics, and we hear that, it's cliche, that if we could get back to whole foods and, again, eat the whole foods and digest the whole foods and process the whole foods, that we would be much better off. We do need to do some backtracking, because there are systems in our body that once they are exposed to gluten, they remember what the gluten reaction is. And so every single time they're exposed to gluten, even if we go back to the way it was or the way the gluten is produced in Europe, which incidentally doesn't have the issues that we have here in the U.S. But frequently, when we eat the gluten from Europe, our body will still react because we have that memory of what gluten does. And our bodies will automatically respond and react as if it was the GMO.
Could I ask you what part exercise would play in the whole process of either being healthy or getting sick with these autoimmune diseases?
Well, exercise is a huge player. Again, lifestyle issues are all really important. And what exercise does is it helps stimulate receptor sites. It helps move oxygen. It helps move the blood. It helps stimulate the heart. And so the more efficient your cardiovascular system is, the more efficient you can move nutrients and oxygen in and out of the cells, the more efficiently you can clear the toxins. Theoretically, the more efficient your hepatic system would work, and on and on. So, what are some of the things that are important in a healthy lifestyle? Well, certainly diet is, certainly exercise. Exercising, the difference or realizing the difference between your sympathetic and your parasympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic are all of the cruddy things that you have to do in life. It's paying taxes, it's the car breaking down, it's the roof leaking. While the parasympathetics are sitting on the beach in Tahiti with your feet in the sand. It's kicking back and relaxing over a nice romantic meal. It's all of the things that are relaxing and soothing and easing. And reality is we have to have a balance between the two. So balance between TH1, TH2 for the immune system, balance between the parasympathetics and the sympathetics in the nervous system. We need to get oxygen. We need to get nutrition. We need to be eating nutrition. We need to have healthy membranes to get the nutrition into the cells. All of this can be done. It takes a patient that is committed, that really wants to take control over their health, and really wants to feel that they are an active partner in controlling their health. The most difficult patient I have are the patients that are real passive, that they just want the simple fix. That doesn't happen. That's not reality. You need to take an active part. Again, you need to control the foods that you eat, your overall lifestyle, so on and so forth.
Do you find that those patients that want the simple process to get better will just go back to a traditional doctor and ask for a pill? And then again, do the patients talk about the fact that they've been to a naturopath or that they've been to a conventional doctor and haven't gotten well?
Well, unfortunately, the report is I've tried this, I've gone to a naturopath, I've tried this, and it didn't work. When reality is, did we look at the whole picture? Did we treat you three-dimensionally? Did we treat the whole body? And did we do the other lifestyle components that are absolutely imperative? There's not an easy fix. But again, for the patient that wants to take control of their life, we can create a roadmap that allows them to do that. And again, with the functional blood chemistry, it gives us the patterns. It tells us exactly what we need to do, and it gives us the report card that tells us how did we do.
Well, I'm just curious, are all naturopathic doctors equal, or are there some who treat one way and some who treat another?
Well, there are. There are some docs that will practice based on what's worked in the past, what I call folklore. And there's nothing the matter with that. If you've got history that shows that a certain herb is effective for a certain condition, then that makes sense to focus on that particular herb for that condition. But if you truly want to treat the body and treat the patient as a whole, and you want to treat function, and you're not just focusing on symptoms, from my opinion is these functional blood chemistries are absolutely crucial. I don't know how you could treat a patient effectively and efficiently if you're saying that you're treating the condition that's causing the symptom. How can you treat the condition if you don't know what the condition is by looking at the functional blood chemistry? That functional blood chemistry is everything.
Well, I'm an older guy, and I've got a lot of friends that have, lupus or MS, and these are all they're autoimmune diseases. Are these diseases do we have the ability to curtail their effects on us by not taking drugs and just changing our lifestyles and changing our diets and our exercise programs?
The important thing is, do we have the ability to manage it effectively? And the answer is absolutely. Can we make those completely go away? We cannot. I wish I could tell you that we had the magic and the knowledge to make autoimmune diseases to completely go away, and frankly, we just don't. But we can manage them very effectively and very efficiently if the patient wants to take the bull by the horns, if you want to take the control, and you want to you do the tough job, then you can control your autoimmune disease.
So it's basically up to the patient to make the decision that they have to do these lifestyle changes, and then they can live a relatively normal life without all of the medications that the traditional docs would give them to suppress the symptoms.
Absolutely, and lots of times, because hepatic toxification or detoxification is such a huge player with autoimmune disease, most of these medications have components in them that actually create toxicity or stimulate the autoimmune response. And an example of that is it's not unusual to find gluten as a filler in various medications. And it's not unusual to find gluten in the actual capsule itself for medications that you're taking that are in a capsule. So if we know that gluten is an irritant, and yet gluten is part of what you're taking to resolve the problem, you're going backwards. So it's extremely important to make sure that the medication that you're taking, at very, very, very least, you want to make sure that the medication you're taking doesn't have something that's actually irritating your condition.
Well, I understand that you can take pills that have gluten in them, but why would they even put them in pills if they know people are susceptible?
I'm not convinced. I hear over and over and over again that the issue with gluten is blown out of proportion. And I think that folks that are more nutritionally and natural-minded understand the effect that gluten has. The pharmaceutical companies are not ready to jump on board with that. I think that they are still defending their position, the same as they're still defending their position with GMOs.
Well, we all know that the pharmaceutical companies are in it for the money, and that's pretty much, the name of their game. I'd like to thank you very much for being with us today. I think we've learned a fair amount about thyroid conditions and about the autoimmune diseases that are out there and how they can be fixed or at least curtailed to the point that people can live normal lives. And I think that's the important thing. But I'd like to thank you, Dr. Showett, for joining us this evening and for your enlightenment on these areas that you focus on in your practice.
Well, Bob, it's been an absolute pleasure. I appreciate the opportunity to share some of this information with you. Again, there's so much more that folks can do for autoimmune disease than that's being done, and I just encourage everybody to keep looking, keep searching, and don't take no for an answer.
Well, thank you very much again. This is Bob Neugebauer signing off for Healthy Conclusions. We hope that you will join us again at the same time next Sunday on 580 KIDO.